Does the hidden Gnostic text, the Gospel of Thomas, give us clues about the nature of reality and consciousness? Do these clues outline a path to enlightenment that could change our entire experience of life as we know it? It seems that this book revealed a power that the establishment was afraid of. You're watching Archetypal Wisdom. Join me in exploring the universal truths and mysteries of humankind. Remember to like and subscribe. Now, back to the video. In my previous video, I went into the history of the Gospel of Thomas. To recap quickly, it was found in Egypt as part of the Nag Hammadi library, and is thought to have been written between the mid-1st century and the early 2nd century. This means it was written within the same time frame as the canonical Gospels of the Bible. However, the Gospel of Thomas was hidden and excluded from the canon of the Bible. The structure of the book is unique in that it is a list of sayings from Jesus, who is referred to as Yeshua, his Hebrew name. And unlike the other Gospels, there is no narrative structure to the text. Today, I am going to explore a handful of these deeply mysterious sayings and try to make sense of them. The sayings I will be exploring are numbers 56, 70, and 106 from the book, and they go as follows. 56. Yeshua said, "Whoever knows the world discovers a corpse, and whoever discovers a corpse cannot be contained by the world." 70. Yeshua said, "When you bring forth that within you, then that will save you. If you do not, then that will kill you." 106. Yeshua said, "When you make the two into one, you will be a son of man, and when you say, 'Mountain, move,' it will move." This opening saying I found to be somewhat ominous and yet deeply compelling. Upon truly knowing the world, one finds a corpse, and once this is known, they cannot be contained. Something that immediately caught my attention was the allusion to death and containment, or lack thereof. In the canonical story of Jesus, he is crucified and then resurrected. In other words, he defeats death. He cannot be contained by the physical realm. This same motif of overcoming death seems present in this saying here. This makes me wonder about the relationship between matter and spirit, or consciousness. In his book, The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, Carl Jung talked about the difference of perspective with which the conscious and unconscious view spirit and matter. He says, "One can only conclude that the unconscious tends to regard spirit and matter not merely as equivalent, but as actually identical. And this in flagrant contrast to the intellectual one-sidedness of consciousness, which would sometimes like to spiritualize matter and at other times to materialize spirit." What's fascinating about this is that while we typically separate matter and spirit, consciousness, into different domains, the unconscious appears to view them as one and the same. You might be wondering how it was even established that the unconscious seems to view matter and spirit as the same. Well, this was done through the study of dreams and mythology, both of which deal directly with the unconscious. Jung observed that dreams often contain symbols and narratives that blend material and spiritual elements seamlessly. For example, a dream might incorporate images of physical transformation, matter, that simultaneously carry profound spiritual or psychological meaning. In his study of mythology, Jung identified recurring themes and symbols that appear across different cultures and historical periods. These archetypes, such as the Great Mother, the hero, and the wise old man, often encompass both spiritual and material dimensions. Myths frequently depict gods and heroes undergoing physical and spiritual journeys, suggesting that these realms are deeply intertwined in the collective unconscious. In fact, this idea of consciousness and matter being one and the same has been experienced by individuals who lose functioning in their left hemisphere of the brain. This was famously reported in the TED Talk, My Stroke of Insight, in which a scientist who studied the brain woke up one morning with a burst blood vessel in her left hemisphere. This meant that her right hemisphere was the only one processing, and the right hemisphere is all about the present moment. It learns kinesthetically and absorbs all the information around it holistically in the form of energy. It is actually the right hemisphere of the brain that is directly connected to unconscious processing, and thus the unconscious at large. Well, during this experience, she stated that the molecules and atoms in her arms blended seamlessly with the molecules and atoms of the walls, and there was no distinction between them. Considering we now know that on the quantum level, matter is essentially empty space and energy, her experience, and many others like her, appears to be far more than just a hallucination. Considering all of this, I wonder if this is what is being hinted at in saying 56 with his statement that whoever discovers the world to be a corpse will no longer be contained by it. It seems that he is implying that the world, or matter, isn't the primary reality. People typically look at their empirical experience as what is most real because it is what they can immediately detect. In other words, people believe that matter is the primary reality. It seems that Yeshua is directly challenging this concept, inferring that spirit is, in fact, the primary reality. What's more is that it's in fully realizing this that someone breaks free of the limitations of matter, meaning they can no longer be contained. This seems closely aligned with the fluid and interwoven perspective of matter and spirit held by the unconscious. In fact, looking at spirit and matter from the perspective of the unconscious and them being one and the same, it almost starts to feel as if matter is a byproduct of consciousness, spirit, and not the other way around. In this case, it's no wonder that the world on its own would be considered a corpse once truly known, the animating principle being spirit, consciousness. In fact, this correlates with the idea of the anima, which in Latin means soul image. The anima is an archetype identified by Jung in many dreams and mythologies, and it essentially was considered to be a psychopomp, which in essence means soul guide. The anima would emerge as a mediator between the unconscious and the conscious ego. The anima plays a crucial role in this sense because it serves as the mercurial intermediary between the conscious and unconscious, allowing an individual to become more integrated and thus more conscious and unified. Even the word anima gave rise to the word animate, meaning to give spirit or life to something, inferring this ongoing connection of consciousness and spirit being the animating principle of matter or the body. This bridge between the unconscious and conscious brings us to saying 70, when he says, "Bring forth that within you." It's well known that the less aware someone is of their unconscious, the more influenced by it they are. In fact, the influence of the unconscious is so potent that the experience of it has been compared to fate. If we consider bringing that forth to mean the unconscious, then it would make sense that it would save you. The more unconsciously unresolved someone is, the more negatively and actively they are affected by it. From a Jungian perspective, this is considered the influence of the shadow, which is all that which is repressed and feared in the psyche. For example, let's say someone has a lot of repressed anger buried in their unconscious that hasn't been addressed or acknowledged. This will eventually lead to outbursts that could harm their personal and professional relationships. In fact, even if it didn't lead to outbursts in the classic sense, the anger could still greatly influence their behavior in a less obvious but still destructive way. They might make choices which appear calm on the outside but are motivated by aggression. Either way, both possibilities lead to the anger becoming a destructive force in their lives. However, if they address it and learn to integrate it, it could end up helping them to thrive. For example, having more control of their anger will help them to be more assertive in their personal and professional life. This will allow them to speak up for themselves, allowing them to have more influence over their success. Therefore, that either destroying you or saving you, depending on whether you bring it forth, starts to make sense. In fact, this process of integrating the unconscious is well established in psychodynamic therapy as an essential part of healing and development. I mentioned earlier that the influence of the unconscious is so potent that it has been compared to the feeling of fate. What is happening when someone is influenced by the unconscious, and why has this been compared to fate? Well, an individual's unconscious is typically projected out onto the world. The individual identifies what is buried within their own unconscious in others without realizing. As the individual continues to project their own unconscious out into the world, this will of course influence the choices they make. It will influence who they choose as friends and romantic partners, what they do for a living, etc. Depending on their unconscious feelings and thoughts, certain people and situations will draw them in more than others and vice versa. The longer this remains unconscious, the more repetitive their experiences will be, thus feeling like fate. However, this is a natural part of the process and par for the course of development and integration. In fact, it's usually these repetitive experiences accompanied with pain that compels the individual to pause and investigate how they have wound up in the same cycle again. This then forces them to look inwardly and retroactively piece together their experience and realize what it was that had been motivating them this whole time. In other words, they identify their unconscious influences and then integrate them, becoming more unified and reclaiming more agency in their life. Considering all of this, the world is so often deeply imbued with our unconscious projections, which gives it more life. Therefore, the more conscious you are, the less you are projecting yourself out onto the world. The somewhat ominous but profound implication here is that at this level of self-realization, the world of matter becomes something of a blank canvas or corpse. Therefore, once this consciousness is fully realized within the individual and all of the unconscious projections are withdrawn, the world of matter no longer appears filled with the life it once was. That life and vitality was spirit or consciousness, which is no longer being projected outwardly, but has been fully realized and reclaimed inwardly. This brings us to the final saying of making two into one and commanding mountains to move. This saying begs the question, what actually happens when someone reaches this level of consciousness and self-realization? What does the world of matter become at this point? If we simply look at the text of making two into one, it echoes this idea of integration and unification. It correlates with the notion of the unconscious perspective of spirit and matter being fluid and one and the same. In fact, this unification is archetypically symbolized with the sphere. From a Jungian perspective, this represents the totality of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, and is called the archetype of the self. The image of yin-yang is a famous example of this archetype. In fact, it's the self which compels the conscious ego to grow and expand and integrate more of the unconscious. What is so fascinating and somewhat troubling is that the unconscious appears to have autonomy and responds intelligently to conscious situations. This has been well documented in dreams and seeing how the unconscious will compensate for psychological imbalances in the conscious perspective. When one decides to investigate their dreams, the degree of knowledge and wisdom it exposes about the dreamer is staggering. It appears to have a bird's eye view and is guiding the dreamer on what exactly is happening in their psychology, whether they are conscious of it or not. This gives credence to the idea that the unconscious is intelligent and appears to know more than we do consciously. Yet it doesn't seem to have a consistent personality like we do, but rather it is a vast expanse of potential and information. The conscious ego personality seems to emerge from the matrix of the unconscious. The two are very much working together. It appears as if the vast expanse of the unconscious is compelling the conscious personality of the ego to grow more and more until it is fully realized and conscious. So what happens when the individual actually manages to realize all of themselves? What happens when they are able to integrate all of the unconscious into the conscious and make two into one? Well, it seems that this is the realm of the enlightened individuals. Who knows what happens at that level of consciousness? If matter really is secondary to consciousness or even just a form of consciousness, maybe one really can break free of the typical parameters. Perhaps they cannot be contained by the world and even perform miracles. But one thing which seems certain is that whatever this level of self-realization and consciousness leads to, it's so extraordinarily impactful that the collective will be talking about those individuals for thousands of years. You've been watching Archetypal Wisdom. Remember to like and subscribe. Stay wise.